We will now examine the Grand Prix variation in the Sicilian defense. White plays the move e4, and black plays the move c5, and the Grand Prix happens after white plays the move f4 sometime. Now, white has two options right now. White can either play the move f4 directly, or he can play the move knight to c3 first and play f4 the next move. Let's take a look first at the direct f4 with white. If white plays f4, then since white has now played knight to c3, attacking the d5 square, we can choose to play d5 immediately. White here once again has two choices. White can either take your pawn or move his pawn forward. If he moves his pawn forward, then we can simply develop with knight to c6. White develops as well, and black gets his bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop g4. White can break the pin with bishop to e2, and now black plays e6, solidifying his center and preparing to develop his dark square bishop. As for castling, black needs to develop his knight first. The knight is best put on e7 because then it can go to f5. So we play knight g to e7, and after h3, we trade and play knight to f5, making room for our own bishop on e7. If white plays c3, black develops his bishop, and after d3, black can simply castle. Black should not be afraid of white attacking the knight on f5 anytime, because after, say, the move g4, black can play knight to h4, and this knight is actually on a very active square, hitting the bishop on f3. Therefore, after the move d5, white could take on d5 as well. Here, if black plays queen to d5, then white can play moves such as knight to c3, which hit the queen since it's developed so early. We don't want our queen in the center so early because it can be attacked by white's pieces, which are developing. Instead, we could play knight to f6, preparing to take on d5 with a knight next move. And now white has a couple choices. White can play the move knight to c3, and after black takes the pawn on d5, then developing simply continues bishop to b5 check. We can block with the bishop. Now if he takes our knight, we take his bishop. And if he takes our bishop, then we can take back with the queen, protecting our knight. Now if he takes us on d5, we can recapture with the queen, and notice that now there is really no way for white to attack the queen in the center with a piece. White may play knight to f3, just developing normally, and black can play knight to c6 as well. After castling, black will play the move g6. Now, black wants to develop his bishop onto g7, for example, c3, bishop g7, because then he can control the d4 square, preventing white from pushing his own move d4. Say after b3 and castling, white can develop on b2, but once again, black will play rook to d8 to stop white from playing d4. Now this d2 pawn is going to be very weak. It's a backwards pawn, and it's on this half open file which black can use to attack this pawn. However here, white can also choose to play something like c4 and guard the pawn on d5. If he plays c4, then this pawn on d5 is actually fairly strong, so we should get rid of it immediately. After e6, we have 3 attackers on that pawn, and he has 1 defender, so he is forced to trade off the pawn with us if he wants to remain up a pawn, and we simply develop our bishop afterwards. If he plays knight to f3, then we go knight to c6, and if bishop e2, we can develop our bishop similarly with bishop to e7. Notice that we do not want to put our bishop on d6 because we want to keep this open file attacking the d2 pawn. After castle, and d3, then we can leave the d8 square for our rook by playing queen to c3. And after knight to c3, then we can just simply play the move rook a to d8. Now, even though black is up a pawn here, he has a d4 square for himself, and he has better placement of pieces as well. The bishop is doing quite well on e6. The queen is doing fine on c7. It hits on the f4 pawn. And this bishop looks very bad. In fact, these two pieces are not developed yet. So I think black here has good compensation for that pawn that he has lost. If white comes here to attack, to check first, before he trades off, or before he plays c4 and closes his bishop in, then we can play bishop to d7 as well. When he trades, we take with the queen, putting pressure on d5. And after c4, we still need to play the move e6 to remove the d5 pawn. Once again, if white takes, this should be fine, but he has the choice of playing queen to e2 this time, pinning the pawn on e6 to the king. This time, we should play the move bishop to d6, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn on f4 is not protected. Now, white will play d3 to protect the pawn, and black will castle. Now this pawn on e6 is no longer being pinned, so white needs to make a decision about what to do with this d5 pawn. White will probably take here on e6, and after f takes e6, knight f3, knight to c6, white can castle kingside as well. Right now, the e6 pawn might look backwards, but we can play the move rook a to e8, and after knight c3, a normal developing move, black will play the move e5. After e5, this pawn is no longer a backwards pawn. In fact, it will hopefully be traded off with the pawn on f4. And after multiple trades, white has complete control over the square, d4 square. The d3 pawn is a very, very backwards pawn, and he has a lot of threats right now for against the queen, for example. We're threatening bishop to d4 with a discovery. He might get his queen out of attack with queen to f3, but even if queen to f3, we have the move knight to g4, which is very, very good for black. We are threatening something like bishop to d4 followed by knight to f2 in the next couple moves. So being down a pawn here is not something that black should be afraid of. He has a lot of compensation, a lot of activity, and he has good control over the central squares. The other option here for white is to play knight c3 followed by f4. Now, knight c3, we want to play the move knight to c6. Knight to c6 is the most flexible move here. It can go with any Sicilian system. So in case white, for example, tries something like knight to f3, we can go back into some systems that we know after d6, d4 takes, and knight f6, for example. This would be the classical Sicilian now. So after knight c6, if white wants to continue with the Grand Prix, he will play the move f4. f4, then black can play the move g6. White goes knight f3, and black goes bishop g7. Now, we move our bishop to the g7 square this time because we want to keep control of the d4 square and e5 square. These dark squares in the center are very, very crucial for black, and he needs to maintain control of them, especially with his bishop. Now, white here has two ideas. He can either put his bishop to c4 or b5. I find that bishop c4 is more often seen in the lower levels, around 1500 to 1700 USCF. After bishop c4, the idea is that after e6, white usually has a system after castle, queen e1, queen h4, followed by knight g5. This type of attack can be deadly to a lot of beginners who do not know how to play this opening. But after e6, we force white to make a choice. White can either play f5 to open up the center right now, or he can just simply castle. If he castles and doesn't do much, then we can simply play knight g to e7, d3, and then we can just play our own move d5. Bishop b3, for example, castles. If white starts his attack with queen e1, we can come here and remove his bishop on b3. If he plays bishop to d2, we can go b6. No hurry to take the bishop there on b3. After knight to d1, we can trade on d4, play bishop a6, and force his rook to move. Black has everything developed. White has his pieces still on his minor pieces are still on the first rank. Oops. Going back to this position here, after e6, white may choose to play the move f5 then. f5 is the most challenging move in this variation, and this really tests to see if black knows the opening. If white plays f5, black should not take this pawn right now. If black takes, for example, and tries to be greedy and win the pawn, this will not end well for this will not end well at all, because this square is weak, this pawn becomes weak, and when black castles kingside, his king will be weak too without the g6 pawn shielding in. Therefore, black can calmly ignore this move and play the move knight to g to e7. White may take on e6 now, and I recommend right now d takes e6. After d takes e6, white may play d3, black can castle, white can castle, and we can play knight a5 to remove the bishop on c4. After bishop e3, we gain the bishop pair, and knight to c6, we control the squares d4 and e5, the dark squares in the center that are so important. White will play bishop g5, attacking the queen, and black will simply attack the bishop back, and the bishop will go back to e3, attacking the c5 pawn. We block that attack with knight to d4, and after queen to d2, then we can bolster the knight on d4 with e5, also letting our bishop get the square to e6 later on. This line is relatively calm. And I think black should have equality in this position. There is also a line f takes e6. After f takes e6, this line is actually much sharper. The line goes d3, then followed by d5, and after bishop to b3, then black actually has this move b5, threatening to play c4 next. White cannot take the pawn on b5 because queen a5, knight c3, and d4 will move material. This line is actually very complex, and I think this is okay as well. This is also very, very playable. I think black actually might get some advantage if white does not know how to play this correctly. However, since it is so complex, you can spend your own time if you would like to look at this. F takes e6 is good, but I think d takes e6, the line that I gave you, is perfectly playable as well. The other alternative to bishop c4 right now is bishop to b5. Now, after bishop to b5, black should play the move knight to d4. Knight to d4, the idea is to attack the bishop on b5 and get control of the center squares on d4. Now, taking will be a mistake because simply black can get his piece in the center or even just win a tempo here. Either way, white does not want to trade on d4. White will castle on castle kingside, and the question might be, what about this bishop here? Well, that's right. We can take the bishop on b5, and now black has the bishop pair, white does not. White will take on b5, and black can play the move d5, quickly opening up the center and getting his bishop out. After d5, important that if he takes you, you shouldn't take with the queen, because then you will find yourself losing immediately because of a fork. So it's better to get the knight away first, but the knight comes to c3 and defends the pawn. So now we can play knight to f6 to attack the pawn once more. If white plays the move d4, then we simply take the pawn on d5. If white tries to win a pawn on c5, that doesn't work because now our bishop is opened, and we can just simply take the knight on c3. If white trades queens, king takes d8, and captures your knight on b3, you can recapture there with the bishop on c3. Material in this position is going to be equal. After white gets his rook out of attack, black can play something very reasonable like king to c7. And I think black here is actually doing quite well. Black has the pair of bishops here, and look at white's pawn structure. These three pawns are isolated. We have isolated double pawns here. I think black should be doing quite fine in this position. After rook to b3, for example, black can play bishop f6, bishop to d2, and then black can continue developing with bishop to e6. The white structure here is quite hard to play with. Going back to the starting position, we know that the Grand Prix starts after the move f4, whether it's at before or after knight c3. After knight c3, there are two choices, playing bishops to c4 or bishop to b5. Bishop to c4, black needs to worry about the kingside attack, so black should play e6, knight g to e7, followed by something like d5 striking in the center. If bishop to b5, then black should strike in the center immediately and play knight to d4. After trading off the bishop on b5, then black will have a nice center of control as well. And if we go through the line, then after a bunch of trades, black will have a good pawn structure and white will not. Material will be equal in this endgame, which should be good for black. Let's not forget that on the second move, white also has a choice to play the move f4. And in this case, black can simply strike directly in the center with d5. Remember that in some lines here, black might be required to sacrifice a pawn, but that should not be something scary for you because you'll have good central control, especially on the d4 square, and you'll be able to have a good attack on the d3 weakened pawn.